Every year, 1.5 million people die due to lack of access to basic hygiene and sanitation. 2.3 billion people still lack access to basic hygiene as recently as 2020. In 2014, Samir Lakhani started Eco Soap Bank to solve this crisis. Today, we'll talk about how 10.5 million bars of soap can prevent diseases, create jobs, and impact 8 million people.
Welcome to the podcast, Samir. We're so excited to have you on today. We're going to start off by really diving into your background before you even started everything that you're working on today. So we read that your parents actually immigrated to East Africa. That's actually a point I can relate to, although it wasn't my parents. I did have grandparents that had parents that immigrated there and then were born there. There was a lot of sweat that they probably put into setting up their lives and also your lives. So we'd love for you to share more about, their backgrounds and how that influenced you as you were growing up.
Thank you for starting on that note. We all come from somewhere, right? And I'm the son of refugee parents who were born in East Africa. As many of you know, that there was a dictator in Uganda named Idi Amin who gave Asians 90 days to leave the country. And so my parents lost absolutely everything in those 90 days, including their old family photos. And you're right, they made their way to the United States, where they put in a lot of sweat, as you said. And I grew up wanting for nothing and had an extremely privileged background. And you know what? It was that upbringing which led me to rediscovering the developing world, because it had always been in my bones to return to these countries and to help the good people that my parents made friends with and left behind.
Yeah, how was that going out and rediscovering these new countries?
For me, what I did was I took a globe and I spun it and I put my finger down on a country, and it just happened to be Cambodia. And so I started volunteering in rural communities in Cambodia. And while I was there, unfortunately, I saw something that would fundamentally change my life forever. We have all had these moments where we walk through a door and just can't return. And while I was in that village, I saw a village woman bathing her newborn son. But unfortunately, she was scrubbing his skin with laundry detergent, which should never be applied to the skin, of course. And in that moment, I knew what I would do for the rest of my life.
You answered my question of why Cambodia. I was really curious about that. Can you speak to the history of where Cambodia was at that time compared to now?
Of course. So Cambodia is a country that is almost 80% rural. And to put it frankly, people live in the same manner they did about 1,000 years ago. And you know what? That is absolutely beautiful and can be extremely magical. As many of you know as well, in the 70s, Cambodia was subject to a horrific genocide, which left a lot of people dead and suffering. And these shadows can still be seen on the Cambodian landscape and in the Cambodian psyche. To put it shortly, the country is a little behind in terms of development and healthcare. The vast majority of Cambodians do not have access to basic sanitation or even hygiene. And so we're fundamentally changing that for good. And we're adding elements of women's empowerment, circular recycling, and restoring basic hygiene to these communities in need.
Yeah, I'm happy you brought that up, especially about the basic hygiene, because we know that we can consider, and I'm putting quotation marks up, what's bad hygiene compared to different developing countries, right? But in this particular time, another thing that I think was really difficult is that many of the doctors and essential workers were killed at that time. So it especially made not only receiving access to hygiene difficult, but also hygiene awareness and education and understanding, why certain things were happening and what to do to prevent those like kind of communicable diseases.
100%. Yes, the healthcare or institutional wisdom of the country was lost. The Pol Pot regime was so indiscriminate that if someone was wearing glasses, that person would be killed. So you can only imagine um, the absolute horror that the country was set back. I will take a little bit of a global viewpoint on this. I think it will absolutely flabbergast listeners to learn that 2.3 billion people with a B do not have access to a bar of soap at home. And the reasons for this are many: accessibility, availability, affordability, etc. Dominique, of course, you know some of these issues with the work that you do every single day. And I want to take it on a micro level for a moment too. In a country like Liberia, which is located in West Africa, according to the UN, only 1% of households have access to a bar of soap there. 99% of households do not have regular access to soap. All the things we take for granted, all the daily hygienic practices that we are actually subconsciously doing to keep ourselves healthy is not at reach to the vast majority of people in a country like Liberia. So how is a country to develop and progress and industrialize if they're still subject to basic illness like diarrhea?
That statistic is unbelievable. And with that, we really want to talk about what that led to in and the creation of Eco Soap Bank. So I want to first talk about how it felt to move to a whole new place, even though I know you'd been working on a project there already previously, so it wasn't like this completely new country to you, but going there in order to start something of your own that was new after spending 4 years in a place like Pittsburgh, which is very different, obviously. What was that like, keeping faith when you were going to take such a giant leap?
Of course. On one end of the spectrum, we run a nonprofit organization. But on the other side of the spectrum, the other identity that we have is we're very much a startup. And this is a community of startups and entrepreneurialism. And so I'll talk to that aspect initially. When we each have that idea, whether it is tackling heart disease or collective impact that Dominique runs, it is so infectious, right? It takes a hold of your brain in a way that no other idea can. And I remember after having that horrific experience, I shouldn't say horrific, having that compelling experience in the village with the mom using laundry detergent, I returned to my relatively luxurious hotel room after that, and I felt that utter pit of despair we all feel in the pit of our stomach sometimes. And as I stepped into the hotel bathroom, I had realized that my housekeeper had replaced a bar of soap that I had barely even touched. As entrepreneurs, we spend a lot of time in hotel rooms, and we have all had that experience. Where has my soap gone? And so I realized that under my feet, there were millions of bars of soap in Cambodia that were needlessly being thrown away. And so I thought maybe we could connect the waste with the people who need it in nearby villages. But I didn't stop there. What if we could insert mothers like the one I met in that village to actually control and command and take ownership of that entire supply chain process? What if we could provide jobs to marginalized women in these countries to collect the leftover soap, recycle it into new bars of soap, and then redistribute it to children along with hygiene education, right? We don't want to provide fish, we want to teach people how to fish. And so Eco Soap Bank was ideated in a hotel bathroom, if you will. So talk about your founding story there. And I remember it was the most sleepless night of my life. But that's what we all live for as entrepreneurs, isn't it?
Yep,
Absolutely.
absolutely. And the problem definitely takes a hold on you, and you just have to do something about it. And I want to go into that in a second. But I was listening to another episode that you were on actually, and the host was talking about how he hoards hotel soaps. And it made me suddenly appreciate the fact that when I was younger and would be in a hotel with my family, my parents would always make an effort to leave the do not disturb sign on the door so that no one would come in while we were gone and like replace stuff that we'd barely used. Like soap was one of the things that my mom was like, well, we've barely used this. Like, why would we call someone in to like come in and clean our room when, it doesn't need to be replaced? And it wasn't until I got older that I realized and appreciated how much waste that probably saved, and started doing it myself when I was in my own hotel room, because each room's impact really does add up over time. You talked about how going back to your hotel room is, the place where this whole idea started. Can you paint a picture for us, to explain exactly what your thoughts were at the time? Like, how did you go from the what if we can do this to taking the first step of action?
Yeah, of course, when you first have this idea, this lightning bulb moment that a lot of us founders have stumbled across, um, at least for me, I hesitated because I knew that the idea was so compelling and so attractive. And to put it frankly, it fed three birds with one scone. I mean, it could empower women. It could reduce waste on a massive scale, as you said. And then lastly, we would have the power to save lives. And I think that is the most compelling motivation of all. But initially, I hesitated because I realized that I had come to a point in my life that had been a fork in the road. And if I had chosen this path, I knew it would probably require energy and attention for this for the rest of my life. We have an interesting journey as nonprofit startup founders as opposed to any other founder. And I won't speak on behalf of for-profit founders, but for us in the nonprofit sector, there is no such thing as an exit strategy or exit plan. For us, we are actually trying to create permanent infrastructure, at least we are. We're trying to create permanent economic and circular infrastructure for a lot of these countries around the world. And flash forwarding a couple of years now, our organization has scaled to employ 160 women in 5 different countries across Africa and Asia. And we have had the great fortune of being able to reach nearly 9 million children with ongoing supplies of soap and hygiene education. This isn't a bar of soap we hand out and then leave. This comes with a regular hygiene curriculum so that we can enable children to be healthy and happy for the rest of their days.
I wanted to ask if there were any tips that you had now that you've done this, for people who might be wanting to run a nonprofit that's based in the US and have operations in another country, or even to like raise capital while they're trying to scale their operations across different countries.
This is a comment I receive quite frequently, and it's so hard to boil down and distill advice into one or two things. The thing is, this sort of world that we all live in is always changing. And frankly, my advice over the years changes as well. Oftentimes, I think a lot about what it means to be a good leader. And I realized that I had been overcomplicating that sentiment for a long time and that philosophy. And to be a good leader is really pretty simple. It's just don't have malice. It's, be ethical. It's as simple as that, as a guiding principle. And whether you're in a startup of 5 people or 5,000 people, I think that philosophy still holds. Um, and the second piece of advice I would share, and this is more related to really early stage startups, ones that are more scrappy in the beginning, is an unfortunate one, which is it's not what you know, it's who you know, which is a piece of advice we receive often in this sector. Networking is the most important thing here. And it actually is a humble exercise because in authentic networking, you realize the extent of your own personhood and your own knowledge base. And so, what you're doing when you network is you're actually building a community that will help you be more resilient during very challenging times. The startup founder who thinks he or she does not need a network or to engage in that activity, no matter how uncomfortable it is, will likely fall on some hard times.
Absolutely. And you spoke about with that resilience. And I'd love to talk to you about being someone that wasn't originally from a community that was coming in with a possible solution. How was that experience for you? And how were you able to get the buy-in of that community?
It's a great, great question. So I don't want to give the impression that we are absolutely perfect in this regard. There are things that we could do
Yeah.
better, but one of the things we do try our very best to do, and we have done it, is basically identify and empower local leaders in these countries to take ownership and to execute the initiative. To put it simply, we hire local. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Obviously, from an operational standpoint, they're going to know the lay of the land the best. They're going to
Right.
know what strategies and modifications are needed to obtain traction and to create the biggest impact. But on an ethical level as well, to your point, we need that buy-in. And I don't want to self ingratiate, but this is a pretty cool initiative because it hits on so many different sustainable development goals and so many different types of impact. The
Yeah.
reception from the developing world has been overwhelming, and that's ostensibly how we've been able to scale so rapidly. And to date, we've distributed almost 40 million bars of soap, and that's looking like it'll double year over year.
Amazing, amazing. I think EcoSoap is a really great example of community interventions and how to make sure you're important that you're actually incorporating the influencers a part of the decision making and not coming in with the type of perspective of, hey, I know it all, I got it, this is what you need to be effective. But it simply goes back to just the education of, hey, we're not going to just provide band-aid solutions, come in and give you soap. To your point, we're going to teach you, right, how to create this livelihood in your lives. And so I love that. I think that it's really awesome with the community. And when we talk about resiliency, I'm sure it was some initial pushback you may have gotten from folks at that time. So, what were kind of those pivotal points you think your resilient see really pushed through and helped you overcome in those type of times?
Thank you for this question. I do my very best to provide concrete examples and anecdotes because sometimes I think I can become overly academic and nobody wants to listen to that. So I will share an example of how a new network basically saved our organization. So you'll recall that our primary supply chain was coming from hotels. And in 2020, we were working with about 1,200 hotels around the world. In 2020, something happened to us all, which was the pandemic, and the entirety of our supply chain vanished overnight, went from 100% to zero. And so we had 150 women on payroll with nothing to do, no soap to recycle, at a time when soap was one of the most important commodities around the world. Okay. And so we snapped into action and we basically started cold calling every single soap factory on earth. And we started asking them for in-kind donations of product. Please just give us a truckload of bar soap so we can redirect it to the Kibera slums in Kenya or the refugee camps in Bangladesh. And all of them said no. They were raking in record profits. Bar soap sales were flying off the shelves. They wouldn't give us a bar of soap. But they said, we can do you one better. The soap industry silently discards about 250 million bars of soap waste every single year because of rejects, inefficiencies, wrong color, wrong shape, so forth and so on. And so we stumbled across a virgin supply of waste products that we could immediately recycle into new bars of soap. And our pivot basically materialized overnight, and our production scale increased by 15x during the pandemic. Okay, what's the point? We are a COVID lucky one, of course. But secondly, it just shows you the power of this community when they hustle and when they're dedicated to building a network. Because we don't work with hotels anymore. We work with the Unilevers of the world, the Reckitt's of the world, the Colgates of the world, so forth and so on. And this new stakeholder network basically saved our organization and allowed us to reach tens of millions of more people.
I'm just blown away at that time because many corporations, they didn't have the social change initiatives. Some corporations just did not have it, and it wasn't until COVID happened, which is unfortunate, right? But then there was kind of this reactive response, that many corporations took. So I'm just really happy that you guys were a part of that. So I think that also goes back to mindset shifts and changes that happen when we experience these type of tragedies, right? And so I wanted to talk to you about the experiences you've had with change in mindsets in these different communities. And it may be just a mindset shift that you've experienced, but do you have any experiences where that's happened because you were coming in with this new approach, and so that could take some time to really shift?
I think that's a really good question, and I'll see if I can think about a personal mindset shift. One of the things I think a lot of my peers in this, we'll call it social enterprise sector, which is
Yeah.
basically nonprofit or social oriented organizations that have a business model. And by the way, we do have an active business model. We charge factories for every truckload of soap we collect. We are a waste management service. And then downstream, we actually sell the majority of the soap that we recycle at the cheapest cost in the world to organizations such as the UN or Save the Children that serves tens of millions of refugees per year or serve
Yeah.
children in schools. So we do have an active business model for the organization. One of the shifts in mindset for us was basically realizing that grants and donations wasn't going to take us to the heights that we wanted to. And so I think a lot of charities perhaps have insecurity with regards to embodying a business or even some capitalist type principles. And we did not shy away from that because we realize that we could scale by 2030 to employ 4,000 women and reach 100 million children per year by recycling 100% of the world's waste supplies. That's 100% market share, if you will. And the only way we're going to do that is if we have a scalable business model. Now, this could run quite contrary to a lot of mindsets of the staff we are working with. Um, for example, we work with a lot of humanitarian staff and a lot of humanitarian partners. And so we had to basically walk the fine line of being a business and a humanitarian organization at the same time. And I'm very, very proud to advocate for both. Because let me put it bluntly, there was no way I was going to do charity raffles to be able to employ 4,000 women sustainably. Just like you two, we had to think outside the box.
That's tough. And in terms of when you got started and you were funding the entire thing, where was the first place that you looked because you needed capital to get this thing off the ground?
Totally, totally. So it was basically angel investor equivalents, friends and family. Our very first employee, her name is Tirang. She's still with us today, working with us, I mean. And so basically that was the first payroll expense that I had to fundraise for. But then, with fundraising in general, your concentric circles just begin to expand and expand as your networks begin to grow organically. The vast majority of our OPEX, if you will, comes from our business model revenue, and we're very, very proud to have achieved that. But there's one quick note I want to talk about capital. I'll keep this primed to the charitable sector predominantly. I think there is an over obsession about fundraising and capital, at least in the charitable sector. And you know what? It's competitive. And unless you have well formed, forward looking ideas about how to become financially sustainable, I think your wells are going to run dry. And so I make my own personal charitable contributions too. I try not to be so obsessed about soap only. And I'm always looking for organizations that are actively engaging in a financially sustainable business model, at least to offset some percentage of their operating expenses. Other than that, in this environment with inflation and geopolitical stuff, we can't rely on donors for the rest of our lives. So charities have a tough time ahead of themselves.
Absolutely. I once heard a founder describe it as the like charity Hunger Games. So, and it's like, how are the people that got into this sector to help others now competing against each other? And it does, I think you'll just be spinning your wheels, well, with it applying for grants after grants. But it gets really sad when, the community starts turning against each other just because, it's so difficult and competitive to, fund programs and with grants. So to your point, developing internal revenue models is the way to go. And I think it's the way to be sustainable, down the line.
For sure, and it's more fun. A lot of my peers in the sector are actually leaving their organizations. They put in 15 years into their charity, and they're looking for new activities. One of the things that I think doesn't get discussed enough is founders have to keep themselves excited and engaged to keep the energy levels up at their organization. And the tricky part is not starting so many lateral initiatives to dilute the core mission, but to still keep it fresh and exciting so that your staff actually knows what the strategy is and what they need to chase down. That is the dichotomy, the duality that founders need to play, especially if they're ones that have their minds running at 1,000,000 miles per hour.
How do you keep things fresh and interesting within your organization? Do you have like a method that you use to,
No.
keep the culture focused? No.
No, totally not. I should read more from Ray Dalio and all these people. I don't read any of those books. But I honestly, to put it, bluntly, and I'm just speaking on behalf of myself, I have definitely an obsessive slash addictive personality, right? Let's be honest. We do this work because obviously it makes an impact, but the way we realize the impact is it's a dopamine effect. We feel amazing doing this work. And if someone asked me to join JP Morgan, I would tell them, no way, I can't. I wouldn't even know what to do there. But regardless, so I think the trick for me was having a solid 5-year strategic plan with very, very solid KPIs and targets. Super simple. We want to reach these many children in 2026. We want to recycle X number of tons by 2030, that sort of thing. And that keeps me very much grounded. However, in the margins, that's where the real creativity can arise. New business opportunities, new ways to express your value proposition. If you can see the creativity in the details, that is one way I keep myself and my team energized and interested. I'll just share one really quick anecdote. In the United States, there are 300,000 craft soap makers and hobbyists. And you know what? They all generate waste materials as well. So we estimate just from the hobbyists in the United States, they waste about 3 million pounds of scrap every single year. And so we're 2 years into a pilot where we basically have set up a reverse logistics, reverse collection initiative to collect all those small boxes and pieces of scraps from those soap makers who make really, really good quality soap. We call it the Scrap Pack. And it's new fun pilots that are still very much brand aligned. We recycle soap from soap makers and recycle them into new bars. But it is another way of looking at the market, tapping into a new market that frankly was just completely overlooked for the last, so many decades.
So I really want to ask you about team and your style as a leader. I think one thing that I personally talk about within my company and the team that I'm building right now is we talk a lot about leadership styles, work styles, communication styles. We talk about all of it because I think it's such a great way to get ahead of like team obstacles. Whether you get along or not, I've just found it to be such a helpful thing that I do. So I'm wondering if you have a specific leadership style that you've identified, or if you could just describe to us, even how you like run a meeting, like what are your tips for like running that efficiently as the person at the head of this organization?
Totally, for sure. And I think the first thing about running meetings and the general momentum of an organization is that I think the CEO or the founder definitely needs to be the one who says, this is how far depressed our gas pedal is. Are we flooring it? Are we coasting? So forth and so on. So I think that inertia needs to come from the CEO. And, on a very micro level, does that mean we attack all of our issues at a meeting? Do we attack a few? What is the urgency of these different priorities and strategies? So the pacing of the organization, in my opinion, needs to come from the CEO. But with regards to other leadership styles, I've learned this the hard way, and I'm beginning to learn it over time that it shouldn't be your objective to be well liked. There are people who are just not going to like you, and fundamentally, there's nothing really you can do about that. However, the thing I think a leader should always be striving for is the sentiment that your team should always feel they have the support from you. You should be victorious if your team feels they are supported. not that if they like you or not. And I think that's often something that is hard for us leaders to swallow and frankly is distracting. So it doesn't matter to me if someone loves me or not. It matters if they have the support to go execute their goals. Think about working in an environment where you have zero support. Nothing's going to happen. You're working in a vacuum.
And I think it's really interesting because your team is so spread out geographically, striving to support them as much as possible. Like, how does that go, and what have the challenges been because everybody is so spread out?
Yeah, no, it's totally true. I have the great privilege of being able to talk to colleagues in Nepal and Sierra Leone on a daily basis. It's just great to jump from one cultural shift to the next, and basically to have global coverage in a single day. Really do have that multinational feel at a very, very tiny startup. So that's really fun. But support can be articulated in so many different ways. Obviously, it might be basic HR like compensation and understanding their professional trajectory. But really, support is pretty easy because if you have an open, enabling environment where people feel comfortable asking for the support they need, you can tailor and customize it to that certain person. I have found that team surveys, anonymous surveys, or otherwise, are really quite useful. People can articulate the way in which they like to receive feedback, and frankly, the ways in which strategy is lacking. Sometimes, as founders, we believe everyone can read our mind because we hold too much of the strategy in our head. And you would be surprised how many instances there are where team members say, I don't know what the strategy is here. I don't know the details. And then you begin to think like, oh yeah, okay, I need to spend time articulating the vision so that it can be basically embodied in your own team.
Yeah, can you give us an example of how you've articulated that mission to people who are like soap makers or your recyclers, the people who are actually processing the product or like dealing with the users and things like that? How has that whole process been in order to keep everyone in alignment with what you're working towards?
That's a great question. And over to Dominique's point, basically, one of the ways we basically decentralize a lot of our decision making and tone and cultural relevance, I should say, is we actually leave the value proposition pitch up to the local teams and the local staff. I don't know anything about how to market soap in Sierra Leone. And I'm not just talking about hiring Sierra Leonean salespeople to go door to door and do their sales pitch. I really mean like, okay, we have this product, here it is, build the value prop around it. And so in Sierra Leone, for example, our value proposition is quite interesting because the soap quality from West African soap makers is quite poor. And so because we use upcycled materials from, higher profile manufacturers, the quality is much better. So our USP, if you will, is actually that it's foreign raw materials. Okay, I wouldn't know that. I would have said, it's 50% cheaper, come buy your soap. Or in Tanzania, or in South Africa, we have a black-owned enterprise certification. This is handmade soap made by women. Come buy our soap. But that's not necessarily the value proposition in a lot of parts of these world. So yeah, I think it's basically pushing out value prop strategy to the team, yet staying tried and true to the core mission statement. It's actually makes life a lot easier.
Yeah, and I'm happy you brought up the value proposition because it can really be tough to develop metrics because everyone's so different. We talk about our social impact metrics. So I wanted to know what are the metrics that has been most effective for EcoSoap in terms of communicating your impact to everyone?
Oh, that's a great question. And I want to say that in everything that we do as entrepreneurs and in the startup community, I think unless we are advocating and pushing the agenda, I think that, a lot of the flames we started with are going to extinguish. And what do I mean by that? Okay. So a lot of the current metrics in the give back world are, how many uh, items we donated to X number of people, or how many trainings did we provide to Y number of people. By the way, we measure those primary metrics ourselves. We do. But it doesn't tell the whole story. And in 2021, we took the financial investment and decision to begin researching our impact in-house to actually understand what is our environmental impact? What is our healthcare impact? What is the impact that we have seen on our female employees? We have positive impact. Our female employees have increased their savings by 417% since joining the organization. We've seen overall general disease reductions by 43% in East Africa. I won't bore you with these stats, but I think obtaining actual like 202 level research showing your impact is super important, and it's not impossible. A lot of people are scared of it because they fear the expense or they fear bad research. But honestly, even if you receive bad research, it gives you a North Star to pursue better impact. So it really is a win-win proposition.
You definitely need a North Star. And earlier you spoke about how, you've developed this 5-year plan. And so I know I want to jump back a bit to your team. So how did you go about hiring from the community? Did you work with different power players in that space and just ask them, hey, who should I hire and how should I lay out this enterprise so it can be sustainable and make an impact?
Oh, totally. So I think trust is a really big part of running a multinational. It's a really big part about it. And honestly, I just don't think incentives cover all the I's and T's in running a multinational, especially if you have such a strong charitable component embedded in your initiative. I think trust is super important because it goes back to the resiliency conversation, and it goes back to some of the glue that holds the thing together. As we know in startups, the thing that makes us different from a corporation is not necessarily the bureaucracy and the access to capital and whatever. The thing that makes us different is that we have to provide coverage in so many different arenas and areas. We need to cover each other. We need to basically do everything. And in that sense, we're going to fall on a lot of challenging times. And it's in those challenging times when the container of raw materials doesn't make it, or if there's a product recall, or whatever it is, you know that you have something that is not predictable. You have something otherworldly that will see you through that problem ethically and to the end. And that element is just basic trust. So that's a long-winded way of saying, we extensively vet and hire people, and basically we have built out board of directors in each of the respective countries we work in to provide governance, but they also manage all the hiring and things like that. So while we do have economic incentives for managers abroad, there's also something that is immeasurable, which is trust.
And in terms of leadership, I really appreciate you sharing that it's okay not to be liked, and leaders have to digest that. That's something that I think goes back to what are we rooting our validation in? Is it the hand claps? Yeah, and it's so true, right? It's like, is it the hand claps that we get from others, or is it, hey, this is the ethical and right thing to do that is aligned with the mission and what we're supposed to accomplish? And I think that takes a lot of not only trust, but just being comfortable with yourself enough to be okay with not being liked. And I think that is huge. That's something that I'm really starting to learn for the first time in my life, that's okay. So how did you get to that space of have you always had that, or was it a journey to kind of get to that space of, you know, being okay with not being liked, but doing the right thing?
It's totally a journey, and I don't want to give the impression that we run a perfect shop here, or that there isn't challenges. One of the things I took really hard at the so we're 8 years old, so we're not really a nonprofit, but in terms of budget size and personality, we are. Um, One of the things I took really hard when starting the organization is when key staff and key team members left the organization for other opportunities or whatever it was. I took it personally, and I felt like, frankly, a piece of me in the organization was lost forever. And that, frankly, we would just never recover from some of these losses before. And what I began to realize only in time, things are only parsed out over time. But what I began to realize is that it's actually can be quite beautiful when you visualize the indelible mark that somebody had on your organization forever, the footprints they left on your organization, whether it's the systems, the culture, the personality, impact, whatever it is, they joined your caravan for a certain period of time, and hopefully their time spent with you was beautiful. And when you think about it in that way, you don't feel grief anymore. And that took me a long, long time to finally internalize that it's not a breakup forever. And you know what? If you leave on good terms, and if you're an ethical leader, they will be. They'll be around for the rest of your life.
I love that you describe it as footprints, right? That they left behind, and also footprints that you could use, moving forward, and how, you structure things, and the development as time goes on. And speaking of time going on, you mentioned the scrap pack project earlier. What are some other initiatives that you EcoSoap has coming?
This is also a really important point. We only recycle 4% of market share, if you will, of the total available soap waste in the world. And so I have had a really, really hard time, like many founders, to basically silence that part of the brain, which is like, we need to start recycling textiles to make feminine hygiene products. We need to start recycling styrofoam like materials to start making helmets. I've had to really, really hush that part of my brain down and realize that, listen, you're at 4% market share, if you will. You got a long runway. Stay focused, and you know what? You will have fun and other challenges dealing with a scaling organization. So once we're at 50 or 60% market share, or if there's competitors or whatever that crop up, then we can start thinking about building other commodities into the circular supply chain. One thing I'll leave you with is one person articulated to me that we are not a soap business. We are an industrialized manufacturing company that invests in countries that no other corporation would even look at. Manufacturing in Sierra Leone is an odd choice, but we decided to navigate a lot of those challenges. And so the minute we decide to start making other circular products, if you will, we will have the infrastructure to really start that right away.
I love too that you mentioned as a founder, you're never short of ideas, right? And many times it's a matter of when, to pursue that idea, or in this case, saying, "Hey, we're mastering this lane here, and let's really hone in until we can get to this goal, this key performance metrics that we've set in the past." So it's just a matter of, to your point, just staying focused on the North Star. And personally, how have you maintained your focus and a happy center as far as your mental wellness while working in an industry that is constant? You have good days and bad days as a founder. Sometimes you hit goals and sometimes you don't. So, how have you been able to maintain just your peace of mind?
Totally. It is one of the most sad byproducts of our industry and community that we have so much burnout. And of course, burnout is an angle of mental health, right? And I can't speak on behalf of other mental health maladies, but it's sad to me when I hear about burnout in our community. And I don't have a tried and true solution, but I want to leave you with an anecdote from someone that I heard, a professor of mine. So I was studying abroad in India, and I was taking a creative writing class in India. Okay, so strange, right? And I remember this professor telling us about his writing habits. And he said, you know what? I don't sneak away to a dark room late at night and write all night. I can't, it's not how I write. The way in which I write is I write 4 pages per day, no more, no less. And I said, oh, that's strange. That doesn't strike me as an artist mentality whatsoever. And he says, if you write 4 pages every single day, no more, no less, you obviously build a habit, but you also know what the next day holds. And you know the next day holds 4 pages, no more, no less. And to put it frankly, the reason why EcoSoap has survived here today is because we have a steady heartbeat of progress and not this let's scale at all costs, let's go raise VC or IPO targets, whatever it is, yada yada yada. So we are writing 4 pages per day, and you know what the beauty is about that? Your output in the world actually compounds when you write 4 pages per day.